Hey guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all having a good week and that everything is going well for you and that you're out there enjoying the heat, which has now come probably full force into Canada. We don't ever have spring anymore. Did you guys notice that? It's like summer and winter. There's no in between. But anyway, I really hope that you guys are doing well this week and that everything is great for you. If you are new to this channel, like I said, my name's Crystal and I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist. From time to time, like for the past couple weeks, I will talk about crimes in other international places or from other communities. It's not always Canada we cover here, but for the most part, that is what I do. So if that sounds like something that you guys want to be involved with, please, please, please hit that old like button, subscribe. Hopefully you will. I know sometimes I'm long-winded, but I will get to the story. You guys can share if you want to, hit the notification bell so that it can ring and let you know when I have a new video. They're usually posted on Tuesdays. And all of that good stuff. Hopefully though, you will leave me comments. I do enjoy reading the comments. I think they're great, especially with theories that some other people have or thoughts that they have. I might not have thought of myself, so it's really good to know what other people think in the community. And I will try to answer them or at least read them and like them, especially the ones that are really intriguing, that have further things for me to investigate into. You know what it's like with crime, right? Just because you've done a show on it doesn't mean your research ends there. And if you guys are returning subscribers, you guys already know how much I love you and how thankful I am that you let me into your living rooms or wherever you stream at least once a week. So hopefully guys, you will hit that like button so we can get that up there and start something good. So for the last few weeks, sorry guys, I'm really trying to not get the mirror in here. The light hits it, so it like gives that really big shine, but you know I move around a lot. So for the last few weeks, we've been doing crossover crimes, guys. We started off with Lake and Ing. Oh God, that's a case. We did Albert Walker, crazy case. We did the tragic case of Dorothy Stratton, and today we're going way back in history. Most of these crimes are historical. It makes me, like, it hurts me to say that, but crimes from the 90s and so on are now considered vintage. So it really hurts me to say that. But today's is a super vintage case, guys. We're going way back to the 1800s, and you may have already figured out who we're going to do. Today, we are doing the case of Dr. Thomas Neill Cream. And trust me, guys, this is a case I've been wanting to do since the beginning. This guy. But there's also other reasons why we're doing this. There is a section of infamy that he is involved with, and maybe this will be something that you guys will want to talk about in your comments. Is he or is he not someone else that is rather infamous from that time? But we're going to get into it. So just before we start, guys, I am going to show you a picture. This is actually from McGill University. Oh, sorry, guys. I hope you can see it there. That's Dr. Thomas Neill Cream, the Lambeth poisoner. And to be honest with you guys, when I initially read about this was years ago when I initially did this, I thought the Lambeth poisoner meant a place in Canada. We have a small community close to London, Ontario, that is called Lambeth, but it is not. Trust me, we're going to get into it. So Dr. Thomas Neill Cream, sorry guys, Dr. Thomas Neill Cream, we're just going to call him Cream from now on. This is really annoying to say all those names. So Cream was actually born May 27th of 1850. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland, and he was the oldest of what would become 8 children. When he was about 4 years old in 1854, the family relocated to a place called Wolf's Cove in Quebec. Now, if you don't know about Wolf's Cove, I'm not surprised. It is a very small place, guys. It's about 1.16 kilometers above Quebec City. As of now, it's actually amalgamated into Quebec City. So it's part of Quebec City now. But before then, it was actually instrumental in the Battle of the Plains. So when they were originally settling Canada, there were settlers that came here from France and from Britain. And at one point in time, there was a large battle over who would get ownership of Quebec between the French and the British. Wolf's Cove was instrumental in that. It was one of the better places to hide in, right? So that you could ambush somebody. And the British actually took Wolf's Cove, and that's how all of Canada became the British Empire instead of part of Canada being owned by Quebec, if that makes sense. Wolf's Cove is actually known as Anse au Foulon, in French. Wolf's Cove is the English name that people give to it. But like I said, it's actually part of Quebec City now. So they moved to Wolf's Cove, and it was because it seems like of a job for his father, William. He became the manager of a shipbuilding yard and a lumber yard. And for a little while when Cream was younger, he actually apprenticed as a ship's builder because of his father's various contacts. So he became a shipbuilder for a little bit, and his father, William, then decided that he was going to own his own business. This would be a wholesale lumber yard, and Dr. Thomas Neill Cream actually helped him do business at that point in time to build up his business. But he really quickly grew bored with it. He decided it wasn't something that was for him. So in 1872, at the age of 22, he decided to apply to McGill University to become a doctor. He would have had to use some in shipbuilding, they do have to use fine tools and stuff. So this did seem like it would be a natural progression for Dr. Thomas Neill Cream. So McGill University, if you guys don't know, and I'm sure you guys do, is one of the most preeminent universities in the world. It actually ranks 31st on world rankings for university, and its medical program is particularly well known. It's basically a research university, and it's one of the older universities in Canada as well. So a lot of people that graduate from there tend to go on and become pretty preeminent doctors. So he went to McGill University, and he studied there for 4 years. And on March 31st of 1876, he graduated with merit and became a medical doctor. Now, 1876 was a really big year for Dr. Cream. We're going to get into the reasons why. But up until this point, up until his graduation, so at almost 26, he didn't seem to tend toward any criminality. Nothing that anybody could point out except for one thing. Sometime prior to graduation, some articles said it was 1874, other articles said it was 1876, so we're just going to go with sometime prior to graduation. He actually took out fire insurance from, I just want to make sure I'm getting it, the Commercial Union Insurance Company of Montreal. And this was for $1,000. So $1,000 in the 1800s, that's a fairly large sum of money. He took this out, and it was ostensibly to insure all of his property at the lodging house that he was staying at while he was going to the university, just in case anything happened. Well, wouldn't you know it, but 2 to 3 weeks after he graduated, a fire broke out in his lodgings. There wasn't much damage, but it didn't matter to Dr. Cream. He put in a claim for almost the whole $1,000. Now, the insurance company was immediately suspicious, mostly due to the fact that it seems like the fire was set. It wasn't electrical or anything like that. So they didn't want to pay out the money. And they fought him for a little while. Eventually, he was able to get $350 from this insurance company. Now, while he was studying at McGill University, he was called, quote, his teachers and fellow students knew him as, quote, a wild and extravagant young man, end quote. His father had money. William's business, his lumberyard business, actually was very successful. So the family would be considered fairly well off. Cream had access to his own carriage whenever he wanted to, and most students back then wouldn't have had the money to have access to a carriage whenever they felt like using it. He always wore fine clothes, and he apparently liked to drape himself in jewelry. He liked to wear jewelry. He did like the extravagant lifestyle, so I just want you guys to remember that. So 1876, like I said, big year for Dr. Cream. In this year, he met a lady named named Flora Eliza Brooks, and they took a fancy to each other. Now, for Cream, it was all about the conquest. He was also a really big ladies' man, guys, and he quickly seduced Flora and just as quickly got her pregnant. Obviously, a man like him who has a reputation, he's just starting out as a doctor, doesn't want people to know about this. And women at that time in the 1800s, even the latter 1800s, didn't really have many choices of what would happen if they were to have a child, particularly one out of wedlock. Remember, it was one of the things that were most frowned upon by society. You did not have sex before marriage, even though a lot of people did. You didn't get knocked up before you were married. It was a very bad thing in society. In some parts of society, it still is today, but back then it was viewed as a travesty. It was criminal in and of itself. And a woman only had a few options. You could commit suicide. You could raise the baby basically as a social outcast. Both you and your child would be an outcast. You could marry the person that knocked you up and have an unhappy marriage, or you could try to obtain an illegal abortion. Now remember, this was almost 100 years before abortions became legal, but Dr. Thomas Neill Cream, he liked to fancy himself an abortionist. So he decided to perform one on Flora. It was a botched abortion. He really didn't have, I don't think, that many people that he had worked on at that point in time. And it really was a botched abortion. Because of this, Flora got really sick and she nearly died. But he was able to expel the baby and she did live. Apparently, when she was sick and almost dying, her father came to see her and wanted to know what had happened. And the doctor involved with her care told him she had had an abortion. Of course, he knew. And he found out who the person was and he went ballistic. So much so that he actually went and found Cream and dragged him back to the area that they were living in, which would be Waterloo. Flora's father was actually the owner of a small hotel, and that would be in Waterloo, which is just outside of Quebec City. It may have been amalgamated into Quebec City by now. I'm not totally sure about that. But regardless, he dragged Cream back to Waterloo and made him marry Flora. Some accounts say that the actual shotgun that he used to bring Cream to, I'm sorry, it's not funny, but it kind of is, that he used to bring Cream to the ceremony, he basically positioned the shotgun on him and forced him to marry his daughter. It was a shotgun wedding, guys. He either had the shotgun pointed at him, or there was always the threat of the shotgun. But regardless, Cream did marry Flora in 1876. Now, Cream loves ladies, guys. He cannot have this. He cannot be a husband to somebody. First of all, he really didn't want anything to do with Flora. He had already gotten what he wanted from her. She was just supposed to be a conquest. He didn't want to ever make her his wife, but he did do it. He found a way out of it. Essentially, the next morning, he abandoned her. He had good reasons in order to keep his reputation, and hers, I guess, as well, and in order to make it look like he was just an ambitious young man. The very next day after he married Flora, he took off for Europe. This was ostensibly to further his medical education. So like I said, he still gets to keep face, but in Europe, he's technically not a married man, so he can still do whatever he feels like with ladies. Now, allegedly, before he left, he prescribed some medication for Flora, and he told her not to take anything else but the medication that he prescribed. So he actually attended lectures at St. Thomas's Hospital Medical School, and this was in London, England. This school is actually one of the oldest and one of the most prestigious schools in the UK. It's been around for a very, very long time, and now it's actually part of King's College in London, so you would get a very first-rate education there. You would be able to go further. And Cream enjoyed life in London immensely. It offered everything he wanted. It offered music halls, it offered dancing, it offered nights of drinking, particularly because his wife is ensconced someplace in Quebec, so he's pretty free. It offered vaudeville shows that he could go to, and it offered a lot of women. And of course, this highly appealed to Cream. I do want you guys to know that the thesis that Cream wrote upon his graduation from McGill University was all about the effects chloroform had on people. I want you to keep that in mind. And also the dates we're going to go through. There's some reasons why I want you to keep the dates in mind as well. So he's over in England studying. He was actually really studious and living his best life. There is another reason that he went to London, though. This was, the start of the Industrial Revolution. And at this point in time, there's basically two classes of people that live in England. People that are well off and the working class. Because of this, a lot of slums had sprung up around London, the London area, Whitechapel, it was a slum. And in other particular places, there were a lot of slums, and doctors were needed to provide care for these poverty-stricken areas. There was a lot of disease in these areas, so England did need good doctors at that point in time. This worked out well for Cream as well. So in 1877, poor Flora caught bronchitis. She did not fare well, and she steadily grew sicker and sicker until she died in August of 1877. At first, her death was attributed to consumption. Now, I know what you guys are thinking, consumption's TB. It is, but it's also a catch-all phrase. It was used at that point in time for any time the body was, quote, the wasting away of a body. That's what they also used consumption for. So basically, if you don't know, consumption is it's the lungs filling with fluid, and you basically drown in that. You can't breathe, right? That's why a lot of people with TB cough up blood or sputum. There's other diseases that have this same kind of contagion. But at that point in time, it was also a catch-all phrase for the, quote, wasting away of the body. No one questioned it for a little bit until her doctor came forward. Her doctor in Quebec had his suspicions, and he figured that it was actually Dr. Cream that murdered his wife to ostensibly get rid of her. He did not voice his concerns at that point in time, but he did know that Cream had prescribed this medication to Flora before he left. And apparently he was also sending her either medication itself or prescriptions for it from England as well. So the doctor had his suspicions, but he never said anything until later on. So as far as I know, Flora's death has been reclassified as murder. I can't say when. But the doctor did later on tell the authorities that he suspected that Cream had indeed murdered Flora. So ostensibly, Flora is his first victim. He also told her apparently to, quote, take nothing else other than the medication that he provided with her. So Cream went on and he did his lectures at St. Thomas until about 78, guys. Sorry, I'm a little bit less prepared. There was a lot of information in this one, so I'm trying. So in 1878, and during his studies, he actually acted as a clerk in obstetrics. From what I gather, a clerk is like an intern. So they would, get the medical history involving pregnancies from the patient. They'd assist the doctor in whatever they needed. This would give him a background in obstetrics. And that's what he did for a little while. He then went to Scotland after he stopped the lectures. He gained whatever qualifications he could from St. Thomas's. He then went to Scotland and studied at the Royal Colleges of Physicians and Surgeons in Edinburgh. This is another very prestigious medical center. He did study there, or medical college, I should say. He did study there, and he did get qualifications from there as well. So after this, when he was fully qualified for whatever he wanted to be as a doctor, he then returned to Canada and settled in London, Ontario. This is why I was like the Lambeth poisoner, but we'll get into that. So he studied in London, he settled in London, Ontario. So for those of you who don't know, London, Ontario is the Forest City. It's actually renowned for its parks and the beautiful way it's laid out. It's got a relaxed feel in there. It's fairly normal crime-wise now for a city of its size. There's about 404,000, let me get the exact number, 699 people that reside in London. That's as of 2017. To be honest with you, a great deal of my best friends as well as my family actually live in London, so I'm fairly well acquainted with it. But I also want you to know that during the time Cream was there, and for a while afterwards, until almost 1960, London, Ontario was known as the serial killer capital of the world. I'm not joking, guys, the whole world. This was due to its size, its population, and the proximity of the killers that apparently live there. Just want you guys to know. So he set up a practice there. Now, his practice was legit on the outside. He legitimately did help people who needed medical care, but he was also operating an illegal business out of it. And you guessed it, giving abortions. He tended to believe he could do this, apparently. And he did have some medical training, I guess, with it because of the obstetrics. So he started offering abortions out of his office as well. It was highly illegal at the time, guys. Like I said, remember, it's almost 100 years before it's no longer illegal to do this. And it contained a great many risks, not only to the patient, but also to the doctor, because if you were found to be giving an abortion, you could be arrested and spend time in jail. Didn't matter to Cream. This was a very lucrative business, guys, a very lucrative business for him. In 1879, geez, guys, I'm having problems again today. I just talk so fast that sometimes the information gets mixed up. So in 1879, a woman named Kate Gardner was found in an outhouse just outside of his buildings, outside of his medical offices, just behind them. She was someone well known to Cream, let's just say. Apparently Cream had been having an affair with Kate Gardner and had once again, virile as he ever was, knocked her up. I don't know if he attempted to give her an abortion or if he just flat out poisoned her, guys, because he didn't, a baby would ruin his reputation and he'd be forced to get married again, right? He didn't want this. So I don't know if he tried to perform an abortion on her. Not much is said about that. What is known is that when she was found, she was pregnant and there was a bottle of chloroform beside her body. Now, we all know that Cream knows an awful lot about chloroform and the effects it has on people due to his thesis research from McGill University, from when he graduated from there. Now, according to Cream, this is according to Cream, guys, Kate Gardner had been knocked up by some prominent local businessman, whoever this guy was, and had come to him asking or seeking out an abortion several times. He always said no to her, according to him, because he didn't want anybody to know what he was actually doing, and that she had committed suicide because she just couldn't have this baby. Now, there was an inquest into her death. I want you to keep count of these inquests too, guys, because there are several of them. So in case you don't know, an inquest can be used in the case of suspicious crimes, but specifically regarding murder, an inquest is used. Basically, it's a judicial inquiry into suspicious deaths. It's also, there can be inquiries into other crimes, but we're just talking about this with regards to our case here. So suspicious deaths, it's a judicial inquiry to determine the cause of a person's death. It's conducted by a judge, a jury, and a government officials. And most inquests, not all of them, but most inquests involve a medical examiner or a coroner giving an autopsy to the deceased. Inquests are still held today, guys. They just want to know if the majority of people also believe that this person was murdered. So, of course, in this case, in Kate's case, the jury attributed her death to, you guessed it, chloroform poisoning. And they figured she, quote, she died from chloroform administered by some person or persons unknown, end quote. So Cream, instead of trying to lay low, actually tried to blackmail this prominent businessman that he accused of the crime. So he wrote him several letters accusing him of this and asking for money, demanding money, in order for him to keep his silence on this prominent businessman who technically had nothing to do with Kate Gardner. This was Cream's baby, guys. I don't know if Kate even knew this guy, but it made sense to Cream in his head, and he loves to blackmail people. He seems to have an affinity and a need for money. He is a doctor. He is making money legally and illegally. Plus, his family is fairly well off, but Cream develops problems. We'll get into that at some point in time. So some articles say that Cream was actually accused of Kate's murder, and the subsequent blackmail at this point in time, and this is why he fled to Chicago. Yeah, he jumps countries. Other articles say that because he wasn't formally charged, but because of all the suspicions surrounding him from the public, and his reputation and his practice were now in tatters, that's why he fled to Chicago. For whatever reason, he ended up in Chicago at this point in time. So just in case you guys don't know, a little bit more about chloroform is that in the 1800s, particularly in Europe, but somewhat in America and Canada, chloroform was used as an anesthetic before giving surgery to somebody. It was used to knock them out, basically, kind of like ether was later on, and then the anesthetics that we use now. So of course it can be highly unstable. It's a gas. And because of this, it has to be monitored and dosed correctly. So, kind of like the Halcyon and the halothane that Karla Homolka used on her victims, chloroform can be fatal if given in the incorrect dosage. They released many papers on this in the mid 1800s, and that's why the US and Canada stopped using it, but it was still used in Europe and somewhat in North America until, I believe they said the 1930s or 40s. It may have even been used a little bit after that as well. Regardless of this, a doctor would know the correct dosage a patient would need, or in this case, the incorrect dosage. However, he's in Chicago now. So Cream ended up in Chicago at this point. He did not lay low. He immediately set up another practice. Ostensibly, once again, the exterior of it was that he was helping. He did do some legitimate business, but this was in the red light district of Chicago. So he was an abortionist as well at this point in time. That's where he's making his big money from. If you guys don't know, I'm sure you already do, red light district is basically a place where one can procure a prostitute, a woman of the night. Now, before we get into this, I am in no way looking down on prostitutes. You have to remember, guys, even today, these women are trying to make money the best and in some cases the only ways they know how. They have loved ones, they have family, they have children, they have friends. They're very much a part of a community, and I'm not going to look down on somebody for how they make their money. I'm not here to do that. A lot of the times they struggle with addiction because of what they have to do or because of circumstances and trauma in their life, and they end up doing this. And you guys also have to remember, in the 1800s, there's not a lot of jobs for women. You could be a domestic. Women were raised at that point in time, and in some societies still today, to just find a man, get married, and have children, then take care of your house and your family. That's what you were raised to do. It wasn't that you really could have a career, especially not them, or not then. And at this, what's to say your husband wasn't going to abandon you? What happens if your husband does abandon you? What happens if your husband died, the principal bread earner in the family? You have to then do whatever it takes to support yourself and your family. So I am in no way looking down on prostitutes. I just have to say it this way because of his victims of choice, let's just say. So he set up his practice, and I do also want you guys to know that it was much, much easier to cross the border at that point in time. There were no passports. There was nothing like that. There were no visas. If you felt like going to live in the States, you just went and lived in the States. There was no DNA at that point in time. There was no Interpol. Interpol itself, from as far as I could tell, some articles said started in 1914. So that was a good, 25 years before before Interpol came into place. So they wouldn't even really know about his alleged crimes in Canada. Nothing like that unless they contacted the authorities from that area. And of course, there was fingerprinting at that point in time, but it was very laborious to do any type of fingerprinting. They were all done on cards, right? The suspect's fingerprints were all put on the cards. Then the cards had to be studied by hand. There was no database people could look into. And, suspects, you could have hundreds, but they may not be in the on the database base itself. Their fingerprints might not be there. So let's just say it was much easier for someone who was thought to have committed a crime to pick up stakes and go elsewhere and essentially start their life over. However, I do want to let you know that Chicago police did have Cream on their radar. He was known to them as somebody who would give people abortions, which were illegal. So they did want to keep an eye on him. So he was actually investigated in 1880. Once again, this is only about a year after he set up shop. In London, he was only in London for about a year, okay? So this is only about a year after he set up shop. Sorry, guys. And this was an investigation in the death of Marianne Faulkner. Now, she was a known prostitute, and he allegedly operated on her, so provided her with an abortion. He botched it, and she died. So he was investigated with that regard. However, the case was thrown out of court because of a lack of evidence. In December of 1880, Cream was at it again. He just doesn't stop, does he? Ellen Stack was being treated by Cream for whatever ailment. It seems like this was a legitimate medical emergency. I don't think this was an abortion or anything like that. She just suddenly died. She just suddenly died in December of 1880. She had been taking medications, which were provided by Cream at the time, of course. And in January of 1881, Cream tried to blackmail somebody else. Yeah, he's back at it again. He loves him some blackmail. I'm not going to lie about that, guys. He tried to blackmail the pharmacists who actually made up the prescriptions for Ellen Stack. So, of course, it's just like today, right? He writes a prescription, you take it to the pharmacy, or it's sent to the pharmacy, you wait in line, you get your stuff. So he sent quite a few letters to this pharmacist, who then forwarded them to the police. But the police, for whatever reason, didn't take these letters seriously. Even though he was blackmailing an innocent person, and police were able to ascertain that the chemists were innocent of Ellen Stack's death. They never laid charges. They didn't even lay extortion charges. They laid no charges with regard to the blackmail on Dr. Cream, or nothing to do with the murder as well. Now, they did have suspicions that Ellen's death was murder, but they declined to pursue it for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason was, guys. They just declined to pursue it. So Cream could have actually been stopped at that point in time, but for whatever reason, just like in Canada, he got away with it. In April of 1881, a woman named Alice Montgomery died after getting an abortion, of course. It was botched, and she died from it. And this was in a rooming house about a block away from Cream's offices at that point in time. Now, she was found, an autopsy was done, and she was found to have died from strychnine poisoning. So in case you guys don't know what strychnine is, it's basically used as a pesticide now. It's a highly toxic chemical. It's very highly toxic substance. It's clear. I believe it's odorless, but it has a bitter taste. And like I said, it's mostly used at this point in time now, like now, as in today's time, as a pesticide. But anyway, she was found to have died from strychnine poisoning. And her death was ruled a homicide, but it was never solved, okay? So they historically believe that Cream was involved with this. It fit the time period, right? He was in Chicago in 1880, 1881. This was done in Chicago, close to his offices, very close to his offices, and it was by means of poison, which is Cream's weapon of choice. If you guys haven't guessed it, strychnine or chloroform were his weapons of choice. So Cream would not be lucky enough to avoid things again. So he's a likely suspect in this, although for whatever reason, he was never charged in this case either. In the case of Alice Montgomery, as far as I know, it's still unsolved to this day. But he is considered a likely suspect in it, a very likely, probably the top suspect in it. So Cream would not be lucky again in the U.S., though. So in 1881, I was given 2 different dates for this. One was a date in July, one was a date in June. So I'm going to say it was June 12th, 1881, because that's what's written on his headstone. A man named Daniel Stott, S-T-O-T-T, who was 61, died. Now, originally, police thought that he died from epileptic seizures. He was an epileptic and he was taking medicine prescribed to him by his good doctor Cream, and this would be in Boone County, Illinois. So Cream did treat him, but he told him that the pills, the medication he was prescribing, was either a remedy for his epilepsy or was a cure for it. He actually, you know, what's that term, guys? He was like a flim-flam artist, you know, saying that, oh, this is going to cure you, you'll be fine. So for whatever reason, well, there is a reason. Cream took one look at Stott's 33-year-old wife, Julia, and he was enamored of her. You know he's a playboy. You know he likes the ladies. And it was Julia that would often go to the chemists or Cream himself. It looks like chemists were used, but Cream was also used, so it does get confusing. Like, Cream would dispense the pills sometimes, but so would a pharmacy. Although I believe he was more inclined to dispense the pills when it was Mrs. Stott showing up, you know, because he was so taken with her. When it was Julia, he wanted to give the pills. So regardless, the two of them started an affair because she would be the one that would go and pick up the medication for her husband. So they started an affair, and Cream, oh God. So Cream actually convinced Julia to then convince Daniel to take out a life insurance policy on himself at this point in time. And he then gave Julia some pills, which she took, which were full of strychnine. You guys know it. It was strychnine poisoning, which she then gave to her husband. And he died in minutes in horrible agony. Like, Daniel died very, very fast from this. So his death, like I said, was initially ruled as an epileptic seizure. They didn't have the advancements in medicine that we have today. And if you're not, even today, if you're not looking for a particular poison, there are some that won't show up unless you do particular tests for them. So they knew he was an epileptic and that he was prone to having seizures, and he was taking medication because of this. So they initially decided that his death was due to epilepsy. However, Cream was not one to lay low. You guys know this. So he began sending out blackmail letters once again to the pharmacists. He sent out letters claiming that the pharmacists involved in giving the pills and making up the prescriptions were the ones that actually murdered Daniel Stott. They were the ones that gave him the capsules containing strychnine. So he's once again sending out these letters and saying, I'll keep my mouth shut if you guys give me money. Now, the chemists, his plan actually at this point in time, guys, was to also sue the chemists for wrongful death, right? Because they caused the death of Daniel Stott. He was going to sue them as well as blackmail them, but he was going to sue them on Julia's behalf so that she could get the insurance money and the money from being sued. So he figured no suspicion would be put on him as the doctor if he blamed the pharmacist. So that's what he did. So the coroner, because that's who he sent the original letters to, he sent some letters to the pharmacist, but he also sent a letter to the coroner saying that Daniel Stott's death should be viewed as murder because it was the pharmacist involved that had poisoned him. The coroner actually ignored the letter for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. So instead of keeping his mouth shut, sorry, it's really ludicrous. Cream actually then sent the letters to the district attorney of Illinois at the time, who took them seriously, of course. This is somebody that's saying that there's been a person murdered even though their death has been classified as something else. So they exhumed Daniel Stott's body, opened it up, and found out that in his stomach, just his stomach alone, he had 3 times the amount of strychnine that would kill a person. So he would have been dead 3 times over from the strychnine that was in his system. The pills that he gave Julia were just rife with it. They were literally just strychnine pills. Of course, suspicion immediately fell on Cream, not the chemist. He was the one that actually gave the pills in the last round of poisonings that killed him. So because he had, quote, knowledge that Stott was murdered before anybody even figured so. Before then, they all thought it was basically a natural death, a death due to his epilepsy. And also because of the blackmail letters that he was sending out. He seems highly suspicious. So they, of course, arrest him and Julia at this point in time. The affair was uncovered, all that other stuff. Now, Julia was not going to go down for murder, guys. So she actually turned star witness against Dr. Cream. She was basically granted immunity. She was not going to have to go to jail. The charges were dropped against her, and she told all. She said that, yes, she talked about the affair. She talked about the insurance, the life insurance, and the pills, etc., etc. And of course, Cream was found guilty of second-degree murder in the death of Daniel Stott. So what I said before, remember how I said that there was a date written on his tombstone? Well, this tombstone was actually erected by somebody in the community, and it says, quote, Daniel Stott died June 12th, 1881, age 61 years, poisoned by his wife and Dr. Cream. So his actual headstone, as far as I know, still says that, guys. So once again, second-degree murder. At this point in time, Cream was sentenced to life in prison in Joliet prison, which is in Illinois. You'd think it was the end of the story, guys, but if you're thinking that, you're wrong. So Cream was actually released from prison after 10 years in 1891. Some say it's because his brother, and I believe his brother's name was Tim, actually begged the governor for that at that point in time, who was Joseph W. Pfeiffer. He begged him for leniency. He's like, oh, please help my brother. He's actually a good man. He just made a mistake. You know, he's an in-demand doctor. He's just, please let him out. So some people say that I want to call him William Faulkner, Joseph Pfeiffer, let him out because of this. Other sources say that Tim bribed the authorities into giving his brother early release. So his sentence was commuted for whatever reason, and he was set free in 1891. In 1887, William, which would be Dr. Cream's father, if you guys remember, actually died. And he left his son an inheritance. So Cream used this inheritance to then actually skip continents this time and flee back to England. Remember, he had done some medical training while he was in England. So he went back to England. He arrived in Liverpool on October 1st of 1891. And you'd be thinking that he wants a fresh start and to leave all the scandal behind him. But no, that's not Dr. Cream's way. From Liverpool, he actually went to London and he secured lodgings at 103 Lambeth Palace Road. That's why he's called the Lambeth Poisoner. There's a Lambeth Palace Road in London. See, we're talking about a lot of the same places, but they're in two different continents. It can get confusing. So Lambeth Road at that point in time was a rather rough place to live. There was a lot of poverty, a lot of petty crime, a lot of just darkness, guys. It wasn't a great place to live. It was kind of like a slum. And of course, the good Dr. Cream reveled in it. He loved this. This made things easy for him. So he once again set up shop there. Now, once again, he did have the legal facade, but he was also providing abortions because abortions were very lucrative at this time. And Dr. Cream, he needed the money. Why, you may ask? Because at some point in time, he developed a drug dependency. And by the time that he came to England, he was very much addicted to drugs. I'm not sure which ones. I'm going to guess opioids, guys, but he was very much highly addicted to drugs at this point in time. And of course, he knew there was money to be made from people suffering. You know, he knew London needed doctors, so he set up shop there. Now, he seems to have gone through his cash very fast from his dad, probably due to the drugs. So he was always in constant need of more of it. On October 13th, so this is less than 2 weeks after he actually arrived in England proper, a 19-year-old woman named Ellen Nellie Donworth died. She was a prostitute and she accepted a drink from the good doctor. She became severely sick and she died on the 16th, so 3 days later. And what did she die from, guys? Of course, Dr. Cream's favorite, strychnine poisoning. So there was an inquest. So this is what, like inquest 2 or 3? It's a lot of inquests. There was an inquest into her death. And Cream, once again, took to mailing blackmail letters out to people. He wrote to the coroner saying he would name the person who had actually murdered Nellie for money, for a reward. He actually asked for the sum of £300,000. So in 1891, I mean, £300,000 is nothing, or £300,000, I know would be a lot more in dollars, but that's nothing to sneeze at now. So can you imagine in 1891, that's a fortune, guys. That's a fortune. So he asked for £300,000 from the coroner so that he could name the person that actually committed the murders. And of course, the coroner said no. Sorry. And this was ostensibly supposed to be his reward for naming the murderer. He also wrote to W.F.D. Smith. So this is a guy who actually ran W.H. Smith Books. So I think he's actually the guy who later on became Smith Books. Remember Smith Books when they used to sell books? This was, I don't know how long ago that closed down. But I think it's the same man. Anyway, he wrote him letters accusing him of the murder and saying that he would tell everybody he was the murderer of Nellie unless he paid him money to keep his mouth shut. This guy is never one to not write letters, I gotta say. If he had, I just want to point out that if he had kept his mouth shut and never mailed a blackmail letter, I don't think people would have found out. But anyway, so on October 20th, this is only 4 days later, Cream met a 27-year-old prostitute named Matilda Clover. After the meeting, she too became very sick and she died in agony later on that night. At first, authorities ruled her death was due to her alcoholism. She was pretty rough, guys. She drank quite a bit, probably due to her lifestyle and the traumas that she, drinking a lot of the times or using drugs for people that work as prostitutes are basically a way so that you don't have to think about the traumas you've been through. You don't have to think about your surroundings. For once, you can think about other things. You can have a good time. You can put that behind you. I mean, the next day when you wake up, of course, all the trauma comes back to you. But at that point in time, when you're using, it's a way to keep yourself numb. So the good doctor, instead of letting bygones be bygones, I mean, no one would have ever thought that Matilda Clover was murdered, unless the doctor said something. You guessed it, he started blackmailing people once again. This time he actually accused another pretty well-known doctor named Dr. William Broadbent of Matilda's murder. Once again, he tried to extort him. He said, I will name you as Matilda Clover's killer unless you pay me off. Now, Dr. William Broadbent wasn't an idiot. So he forwarded these letters to Scotland Yard. Okay, so Scotland Yard. To tell you the honest truth, guys, when I was much younger, I thought Scotland Yard was basically a blanket term. I thought Scotland Yard was a bunch of detectives who were working for Europe, and they were like the most prestigious detectives, kind of like the Pinkertons. That's what I thought Scotland Yard was. But it isn't. Scotland Yard is actually the headquarters for the Metropolitan Police Force and all the forces that police the various the various subdivisions, I want to call it, the various boroughs. There we go. Kind of like New York, right? New York has a lot of boroughs. Okay, London also has this. So it was the police It was the Metropolitan Police Force plus all the police forces that policed, I know it's a lot, guys, all the boroughs surrounding London. They do not deal with London proper, and London proper is only about 1 square mile. That is actually policed by the London Police Force. But all the other areas around it was policed by Scotland Yard, or the Metropolitan Police Force. So the original building that housed the Metropolitan Police Force had a back entrance, and the back entrance was on Great Scotland Yard Road. And that was a public entrance. That's where a lot of people used to come in to report crimes. So eventually the name became synonymous with that police force themselves. So that's what Scotland Yard is. It's actually just a police force in let's say around London. So on April 2nd, 1892, this was just after Cream's return from a vacation in Canada. I can't believe we let him back in, but like I said, no passports, no nothing. Nobody would have known. Cream was at it again. This time he tried to poison a prostitute named Lou Harvey. So we're going to refer to her as Lou. Lou was suspicious of the pills that Dr. Cream had tried to give her. So she only pretended to take them. And then she later got rid of them. Allegedly, I guess, at trial, yeah, you know there's going to be a trial. At trial, she said she threw them into the River Thames. And that's how she got rid of them. So on April 11th of 1882, Cream met up with 2 prostitutes, 21-year-old Alice Marsh and 18-year-old Emma Shrubell. So he charmed them enough to let them into his house. And wouldn't you know it, he'd actually brought them over bottles of Guinness. So he gave them the Guinness, then he left. He was so thoughtful, wasn't he? Then he left, and the 2 of them died in horrible agony that night. Both of them died together that night. So, of course, you guys guessed what was in the bottles. They'd been poisoned with strychnine. Cream, once again, never one to lay low. I'm so sorry, guys. He's already suspicious to Scotland Yard, okay? Because of his repeated blackmail attempts over the years, like trying to blackmail physicians or chemists or anybody. I mean, this man is writing letters that are accusing people of murder on cases that aren't even attributed to murder, right? So he was already on Scotland Yard's radar, and probably for the fact that he was giving abortions as well. Furthermore, police were always able to determine that the other people, like Dr. Broadbent or the chemists involved, W.H. Smith, anybody like that, they were always able to clear these people and prove that they were innocent. However, his new round of blackmail letters, right, because he's still blackmailing people at this point in time with the deaths of Emma and Alice, he's still blackmailing. They found in his letters a reference, like he was even more suspicious to them because they found in his letters a reference to the murder of Matilda Clover. You guys remember that up until this point, Scotland Yard thought she died because of her alcoholism. How would the illustrious Dr. Cream know she was murdered, and by strychnine, unless he had done so himself or was an accomplice to it? So police now figured that the author of the blackmail letters, so Cream, was falsely accusing other doctors and falsely accusing other doctors and pharmacists, was actually a serial killer known now as the, quote, Lambeth poisoner. This was because the 4 murders attributed to him, as well as the attempted murder of Lou Harvey, all took place on Lambeth Palace Road, right in the vicinity of where he stayed and set up shop. So incredibly, shortly after this, Cream met up with a man who is kind of instrumental in the case. This man is from the U.S., and his name is John Haynes, Haynes. Now, there are some articles that say that he and Dr. Cream were friends from before. I don't tend to believe that's true. There's other articles that say that John Haynes was actually just on vacation in London and the two of them somehow met up. But apparently, John Haynes was actually a former New York police detective. And he and Cream started talking about the Lambeth Poisoner crimes. He had heard about the Lambeth Poisoner crimes while he was living in the States. And when he came on vacation, he met up with Cream and they talked about it. And Cream seemed to have quite a bit of knowledge in it. In fact, allegedly, Cream had also bragged to other people about his, quote, vast knowledge of the crimes, end quote. So Dr. Cream offered to take Haynes, out on a tour of all the places that the victims had lived and died. So, of course, Haynes took him up on this, and he visited all the various crime scenes and the places where these people had lived and done business. Later on, Haynes was somehow talking to someone he knew from Scotland Yard, and he told the British police officer that he had gone on this tour with Cream and everything Cream had told him. So, of course, Scotland Yard is now even more suspicious, not only about the blackmail letters and about the abortions, but about the fact that this guy seems to have so much knowledge about the Lambeth poisonings and about murders that aren't even yet attributed as murders that were thought to be from natural causes or disease. Because of this information, and the letters that police believed were written to basically ward any blame off of Cream to make himself look innocent, but if he had kept his mouth shut, nobody would have known anyway. Just saying. And to put various other names out there so that they'd have other suspects to look into instead of looking into Cream. Scotland Yard decided to put Cream under surveillance. So through this surveillance, they found out about Cream's affinity for visiting prostitutes. So not only did he perform abortions on them and murder them, he also liked to partake of prostitutes' charms, let's just say. And of course, all of the victims in England at this point in time were all prostitutes. Scotland Yard then found out where Cream had come from before, where he had lived prior in the States. And so they contacted Chicago police and were able to find all about the various suspicions from there, and also his conviction for the murder of Daniel Stott and the fact that his weapon of choice was strychnine. So an inquest was once again held, and if you guys are keeping track, I'm pretty sure this is the 4th inquest that he's been involved in. A lot of inquests on him. I'm not sure if the death of Mary Ann Faulkner in the U.S., remember he was investigated for that. I'm not sure if there was an inquest about that one. So if there was, it'd technically be his 5th inquest. But anyway, or if he was just investigated. But this was led by Dr. Athelstan Braxton Hicks. And yes, I'm talking about that Braxton Hicks. His father was actually the famous obstetrician, Dr. Braxton Hicks, just before you give birth, or sometimes it is throughout pregnancy. It can be, I think it's from like 5 months on or 6 months on. Sometimes your body will be getting itself ready to have contractions and you'll have false contractions, false labor. Braxton Hicks. So his dad was actually that doctor. In July of 1892, they held this inquest. And Braxton Hicks actually read out a letter from someone claiming to be Jack the Ripper. Yes, you heard it, claiming to be Jack the Ripper, that said that Dr. Neill was innocent. Okay, we're going to get into why he's been called Dr. Neill. Everybody in the courtroom, including Cream himself, started to laugh at this. They all thought it was hilarious. So the inquest verdict was that Matilda Clover had not died, of course, of alcoholism, but had indeed died of strychnine poisoning. Carried out by a, quote, Dr. Thomas Neill, end quote. Now, the reason why we're saying this is apparently when he was questioned, Cream told people he was actually just a guy named Dr. Thomas Neill, not this Dr. Thomas Neill Cream everybody was saying that he was. It was almost like he was trying to, I don't know. It was almost like he was trying to say they had the wrong man, like it was a case of mistaken identity. Oh no, I'm not this Dr. Thomas Neill Cream. I'm just Dr. Thomas Neill. Regardless, he did this. So on June 3rd of 1892, Cream was actually formally arrested for the death of Matilda Clover. And then on July 13th of 1892, he was formally charged with the murders of Matilda Clover. So formally charged. He'd been arrested under the suspicion, remember, for Matilda. But now he was formally charged with the murder of Matilda Clover, the murder of Nellie Donworth, the murder of Alice Marsh, and the murder of Emma Schrevel. And also he was also charged on that date with the attempted murder of Lou Harvey and extortion for all the blackmail letters he sent to various people. So he insisted once again that he was not this Dr. Thomas Neill Cream that everybody was looking for, or that was the Lambeth poisoner. Instead, he was just Dr. Neill, or Dr. Thomas Neill. And periodicals, newspapers at that point in time, when they talk about the trial coverage, actually do refer to him as Dr. Thomas Neill in their papers. So the trial itself took place from October 17th to October 21st of 1892. He was, of course, found guilty on all the counts. Guys, you knew he would be. And sentenced to death on all counts. In fact, it only took the jury 12 minutes to reach a verdict. And this was at the Old Bailey in London. You know, that's a famous courthouse. Old Bailey, that's where most trials were held, particularly at that point in time. So justice was swift back then, guys. You don't wait the 20 plus years you do now on death row, waiting around for your execution date. No, justice was way swift back then. In fact, we talked about this with Swift Runner and some of the other historical cases we've done, how fast, justice took place. Belcher Island Massacre even. It was way faster back then. And on November 15th, at, Newgate Prison, his execution was carried out by a man named James Billington. There wasn't a lot of fanfare. Apparently, he was quiet and composed when he went up to the scaffold. They put the noose around his neck and he was hung. We're going to get into some of that though. Just hold on. And he was hung. This was in front of various police force members. Of course, the executioner himself, James Billington, probably officials from the prison itself. And he quietly died. That was the end of the Lambeth poisoner. He was later taken down and then buried within prison property walls in an unmarked grave. And his name was actually stricken from McGill University graduate directories. You won't find him in there because, it's an embarrassment. But also he's a murderer. He doesn't need to have any of the merit associated with being a graduate of McGill University. The picture I showed you, just in case you guys didn't see the caption, so I don't get in trouble from anybody, was actually from the McGill University archives. So Billington, we're not done yet. You guys think we're done, but we are not done yet because there's another piece of this chapter that came about after Cream died. So James Billington, the guy that hung him, his executioner, claims that Cream's last words were, quote, "I am Jack the," end quote. And then he was hung. Or his neck broke at that point in time. He claims that. Now, James Billington is the only person that claim is attributed to. So none of the authorities around that were watching the hanging ever heard him say that. None of the police, nobody from there attributed that sentence to him. Nobody from the crowds that were outside the prison walls that had gathered to hear the hanging. Public executions had been banned in, I think it was 1868 in London. So you could gather outside of the prison, but you couldn't actually witness it on the inside. So none of the people from the crowd heard him say that. Nobody but James Billington ever attributed this sentence to him. But James Billington, of course, was not one to keep that to himself. That became his claim to fame. James Billington went around telling people, "I executed Jack the Ripper." So whether he actually said this or didn't say this, of course, is very unsubstantiated, guys. This is just a story, but it's a story that ended up taking firm root. People suddenly started looking into this. So, like I said, public hangings were not allowed. They were done away with in 1868. So I guess technically speaking, Dr. Thomas Neill Cream's crowd, the crowd that gathered outside to listen to him, hear him being hung, was actually the largest to have done so since the public executions. And it's kind of like what happens in the States now, when somebody's on death row and they finally have their date and they're going to be executed in the next 24 hours or whatever. Large crowds start to gather around the prison to ostensibly be there when this person dies. Now, some people say that he was so afraid that when he was, even though he was quiet and composed, but he was so afraid to die that he actually said, quote, "I'm ejaculating," end quote, before he was hung, and Billington just misheard him. But who's to say for sure what he actually said? Also, he's a doctor. Do men ejaculate when they're executed? I don't know. Like, I think you would lose control of your bowel and your bladder, but would you ejaculate when you were scared? I don't know. Regardless, that's what people say that he was actually saying. So after his death, the Lambeth poisoner, who had 10 murders behind him, there were several that he was actually guilty of and several more that he was suspected of, so 10 plus in total. I think a lot of articles have him at 11, but there are more that could probably be attributed to him. But for those he was also suspected of, right? So he gained a certain degree of infamy from that as well. Not just being the Lambeth poisoner, but because Billington said that he claimed he was Jack the. Now this has been debunked, guys, for the most part, by most Ripper experts. And official records do say that Cream was in Joliet prison at the time of the Whitechapel murders. Remember, they occurred in 1888. If he was not let out until 1891, there's no way he could have been in another continent killing other people. He was ostensibly in jail, in prison, in Illinois at that point in time. So a continent away. Ripperologist Donald Bell has theorized that Cream or his brother Tim, sometime before 1891, and I want to say the exact date he was thinking of was 1887, to coincide with William's, they didn't kill William, but to coincide with his father dying and maybe him being allowed to see his father, I don't know, that he was let out prior to 1888, so sometime in 1897. And of course, because this was due to the fact, according to this Ripperologist Donald Bell, that Cream and or his brother Tim bribed officials to let him out way earlier than what people thought. So, and then thus of course he could have been Jack the Ripper. Another man named Sir Edward Marshall Hall suspected that Cream actually had a look-alike who served his sentence for him instead of Cream himself, which would then, of course, free him up to be Jack the Ripper. This doesn't make a lot of sense because I don't know who would purposely serve a sentence for you. I guess, unless Cream was paying him off, but Cream himself appeared to have needed money. I don't really know. Anyway, this is what he says. Regardless, this is what Sir Edward says. This is highly unlikely, of course, and contradicts all evidence from that point in time. It contradicts everything the authorities involved in all of his cases said. It contradicts all of the newspapers and periodicals from the time. It contradicts all the information given by Cream's lawyers, all the information given by Cream's family, everything said about them, and everything that Cream himself said. So there's no way that he was probably let out earlier than 1891, earlier than the earliest time that he was let out when his sentence was commuted. But anyway, people still hang on to this. So Cream's MO was actually much different from Jack the Ripper's. If you'll remember, Cream's MO was poisoning. We haven't really heard of him doing anything else other than poisoning people. It doesn't look like he ever used a knife. However, who's to say he could have been involved in more murders? You know, we can't officially say that, but his weapon of choice was definitely poison, particularly strychnine. Jack the Ripper, of course, we all know he liked to use knives. However, Cream would have actually possessed the precision needed in order to make him be Jack the Ripper. The Ripper murders were carried out, according to people, with a lot of precision. So much so that people believe that Jack the Ripper was either a medical student, a doctor, or a butcher, someone with knowledge of anatomy. And they believe, people that think that Cream is Jack the Ripper believe that because he was an abortionist, he would quote, that his being an abortionist, quote, is evidence of his tendencies towards Ripper-like butchery, end quote. Although I will point out that a lot of other doctors illegally performed abortions at that point in time and too, so who's to say for sure. He seemed to like to perform abortions, though. He seemed to really like to specialize in these for whatever reason, probably due to his hatred of women. But anyway, he seemed to believe he was very good at them. It was more than likely due to the money, though, that he needed for his drug habits. So Jack the Ripper and Cream did both think that they were morally superior to the rest of the unwashed masses. That's their words. They believed most people were beneath them and that they were smarter than almost everybody else, especially the authorities. Okay, in the case of Jack the Ripper, that may have been true because he's never been caught and he's never once been identified. So who's to say for sure? It could have been luck too, but both did prey on prostitutes because they wanted to, quote, rid society of what they considered to be a terrible menace, end quote. Their words, not mine, guys. You know how I feel. However, in Cream's case, he also liked to use their services. He really did like to have his sex on tap. Who's to say for sure if the Ripper did or didn't use prostitutes? We can't say for sure. You know, in the case of the Green River Killer, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but just to give you a little bit of perspective. When he was in the army, allegedly, he visited a prostitute who gave him an STI. And that's where they believe his hatred of prostitutes came from, because it like deformed him, I guess, his penis. So that's where some people attribute his hatred of prostitutes for. Who's to say? Maybe Jack the Ripper had procured a prostitute, she had accidentally given him something, and that's where his hatred come from. But he did believe he was better than everybody and that they were the scourge of the earth, etc., etc. So neither really thought much of women in general. Obviously, you can tell Cream didn't. He just was in it for the good time. He didn't really want to get married to anybody. He just wanted to use women. And both, quote, liked to write letters, end quote. Remember the letter. Sorry. A letter purported to be from Jack the Ripper. Anyway, no one knows for sure. But, you know, even that can be debated because no one really knows for sure if Jack the Ripper wrote any of the letters attributed to him. Apparently there were many. To be honest with you guys, I only knew about the 3. The first one, the Dear Boss letter, and the From Hell letter. I only knew about 3, but apparently people claiming to be Jack the Ripper or the Ripper himself actually handed out various letters. He actually mailed various letters, a lot of them from the sounds of it. Now, apparently, like I said, there were quite a few, but only 2 or 3 have ever been considered possibly to have been written by Jack the Ripper, specifically the Dear Boss and the From Hell letters. To be honest with you, I don't really know if he wrote any of them or if he just sat back and let other people do it. The only one that I could say that it seems more likely that Jack the Ripper may have written was the From Hell one, and that was speaking to his mindset at that point in time. But we have no idea if Jack the Ripper actually wrote any of these letters. Most Ripperologists actually believed there are no real letters, that he never wrote a letter. So Cream is no longer considered to be a likely Ripper suspect, guys. Most people have debunked this, but he is still on the list, so it did add to his infamy. And that's it, guys. Still, what is this, like 100 and... Oh my God. 150 plus years later, we're still wondering if this guy is Jack the Ripper. But no, most people do not believe Dr. Thomas Neill Cream was Jack the Ripper. What do you guys think, though? That's it. That's the story of Thomas Neill Cream. What do you guys think? Do you think he poisoned his first wife, Flora? I do. I definitely do. I think he probably chloroformed her. I think what was ever in those pills that he had told her to take and to take nothing else was either chloroform or strychnine. He killed her. We know it. The death is officially, he's considered the most likely suspect. Most evidence points to him doing this, as well as, remember Alice Montgomery. She was another one of the victims that they weren't sure who did or did not do. They knew she was murdered, but they weren't sure who did it. It was later on attributed to him, so I do think that he did that as well. What was he? Was he a psychopath? I don't know. He certainly possessed the charm, the guile, the smarts. The fact that he didn't really seem to have any long-term relationships. He seemed incapable of them. I mean, he was married and he didn't give a crap. The fact that he didn't seem to have many long-term friendships either. Not a lot of people came forward saying they were friends with him, other than the possibility that John Haynes was. But I mean, a lot of the times when people had friendships back then, they were through letters. So it's harder to say for sure. He was highly manipulative. We know that. I mean, he was able to manipulate Julia into getting the insurance money and then to giving her husband the pills that killed him. So, I mean, he's manipulative. I think for sure he was egotistical. I want to say he seems like he's got some psychopathy going on. It's possible. I don't think he was a sociopath. There is a difference between the two. Sometime we will talk about that. It's possible he could have been a narcissist, but you know, this guy was a shady guy nonetheless. He really was. He of course thought he was superior to other people. He thought he was much better than other people. So, I mean, he kind of strikes me as a psychopath at this point in time. Is he Jack the Ripper, guys? You know, we have to ask that question. Is he Jack the Ripper? Okay, no. I don't believe he's Jack the Ripper. More than likely. I mean, it's almost impossible for him to have been. Okay, you can throw out as many crazy theories as you want, that he had this look-alike or that he was able to bribe officials way earlier. Every bit of evidence that's concrete points to him being in Joliet prison at this time. And also, most murderers tend to stick to the object that they're used to by way of murder. Not all of them. You guys know not all of them are. But Eileen Wuornos, right? She always used a gun. Jack the Ripper used a knife. Dr. Thomas Neill Cream seems to love to poison people. It'd be unlikely that he'd go to a knife for a short period of time and then return back to poisoning, but he could have. I tend to believe, and we're not going to get into this too long because I know what's going to happen. We're going to have a debate on Jack the Ripper. I tend to believe that Jack the Ripper was actually Aaron Kosminski. He was a Polish butcher, I believe, at that point in time that frequented the Whitechapel district at that point in time. And he also had a severe hatred of women. So I tend to believe it was him, not Dr. Thomas Neill Cream. But because of James Billington, his name has been thrown out there. And also, to be honest with you, if Dr. Thomas Neill Cream did say, I am Jack it could have just been another way for him to screw with people. He seems to love to screw with people. All the blackmail letters, all the I'm going to accuse you of this and that, all the accusations in general. So all the fact that he could have stayed quiet and, you know, half of or at least a quarter of his murders been attributed to natural or disease causes. He didn't do that. So I feel like he may I feel like if he actually said it, he was probably screwing with people, but who's to say? Regardless, he does have a claim to infamy, not only being the Lambeth poisoner, but a possible suspect in the Jack the Ripper murders. Let me know what you think down below. As always, guys, this is it for crossover crimes. Next week, we're going to start something else. We're going to go on to a different crime. And hopefully you guys will remember to like this video. It really helps me out. Hopefully you'll remember to subscribe. I know I'm long-winded, but I try. I got to give you all the facts. And hopefully I will see you guys back here next week. Have a good one, guys. Bye.